The JFK area grew out of the expanded development of what was initially called the Deep Deuce area. Oklahoma, when Oklahoma became a state, the very first law passed, Senate Bill Number 1, was a bill to implement segregation in Oklahoma in every facet of life.
Jim Crow laws.
Jim Crow laws. And the first one began with segregation of transportation, in other words, separate waiting rooms, but it spilled over into every facet of life for African Americans in Oklahoma. Separate waiting rooms, separate water fountains, separate phone booths, separate educational systems, everything was separate, including residential living areas. So African Americans were restricted to a certain neighborhood area in Oklahoma City, which was initially the Deep Deuce area. As neighborhoods began to expand, the rule was that so much of the community, so many people in the neighborhood have to move out, whites have to move out before African Americans could move in. So there was just a gradual movement of the African American community north and south, and that began to encompass what was later become 4th Street, and then as far over as 8th Street. A lot of people are unaware that one of Oklahoma's governors, Governor Mary, in fact called out the National Guard to prohibit the expansion of African Americans into white neighborhoods. But the expansion initially came. The expansion finally grew south far enough that it would encompass what used to be the Oklahoma City Fairgrounds area. So a lot of what's in the 4th Street area was called initially the Fairgrounds, because Oklahoma's Fairgrounds was located in that area, where now Douglas High School stands. So that area became the expanded area of the African American community. Douglas High School, which initially started in the Bricktown area, was the first high school, and when the neighborhood expanded farther north, 4th Street and 8th Street in that area, then Douglas, the students of Douglas moved into what was then a white high school, but it was then renamed Douglas High School. So the high school on 6th and High became Douglas High School, later to become Page Woodson School, and later becoming Moon School also. It had many name changes during that time. And Charlie Christian, Ralph Ellison, the principal that it was named after, Inman Page, was a very renowned individual himself. He was born a slave, escaped slavery through the Civil War lines, and made his way to Washington, D.C., initially attended Howard University, and was one of the first African Americans to graduate from Brown University. Then he became the president of Langston University, and after Langston, he moved to Oklahoma City, where he became principal of then Douglas High School, a school named after Frederick Douglass, of course. His daughter was a lady named Zelia Bro, and Zelia Bro was a music teacher, and she was the person that influenced so many of the greats that you had just mentioned, Charlie Christian, Ralph Ellison, and others, musicians that came out of the Deep Deuce area. There are two things that really relate to what happened to the African American residential districts. The creation of these districts was segregation. It forced African Americans to live in restricted areas. With the end of segregation came new opportunities for shopping and new opportunities for residential living, for choosing neighborhoods that you wanted to live in. So one of the inevitable outcomes of the progress that came from desegregation and integration was the freedom for people to move to locations that they wanted to live in other places. The freedom of people to shop in other places and other stores, and that's exactly what happened. That people began to move to new neighborhoods and find better housing that was in areas closer to where they worked. And that's kind of what happened, is that the people began to move. Now, specifically to the lower JFK area, in the late 70s and early 80s, I served as the director of the JFK Project Area Committee. This was the citizen participation component of the Urban Renewal Authority. And if you look at that neighborhood now, you're looking at the devastation of what urban renewal did to the African American residential area.